So the Nintendo Switch 2 is finally here. After months and months of speculation and all the leaks that we've seen, especially over the last few weeks, it's so nice to finally see an official confirmation from Nintendo themselves. So in case you missed it, early yesterday morning, Nintendo just suddenly shadow dropped a little first look at their new console, which is the Nintendo Switch 2. At first glance, it looks like really not much. It just seems like the regular Switch, but they really try to highlight that it's like the Switch. However, there are noticeable differences and noticeable changes, which I really want to talk about in this video. Now, I wasn't actually going to do this video. I was like wondering if there's really anything to add. In fact, I was working on another video that I was going to post this weekend, but this was just sort of swirling in my head all day, and I really wanted to talk about it. So here we are. But the Nintendo Switch 2 is as straightforward as its name implies. Personally, I wasn't a huge fan of the name to begin with. I was kind of hoping that the name would be something more exciting, like the Super Nintendo Switch or the Nintendo Switch Pro or something in that sort of realm. And I think calling it the Super Nintendo Switch is something that is especially a popular choice and a popular decision, especially because it would be really nice to be in line with like their older consoles, going from the NES to the SNES, and so we'd be going from the Nintendo Switch to the Super Nintendo Switch or the SNS. But I do respect the decision to just go with something really simplistic with, you know, just it being the Nintendo Switch 2, which is odd coming from Nintendo, considering they usually have some really odd naming conventions. Like, we went from the Wii to the Wii U, and then we had the DS and the 3DS, and then the new Nintendo 3DS, which can get pretty confusing, understandably so. And so it's definitely an interesting move from Nintendo to see that they're kind of going in a much more simpler approach, which I definitely respect. But maybe it's exactly that. They just wanted to avoid all the confusion. When we went from the Wii to the Wii U, there was tons of confusion amongst a lot of consumers. They didn't know what the difference really was. And I guess in this case, they just kind of want to make it simple for the general consumer. So they want it so that a parent or a grandparent or some other relative can walk into GameStop or Best Buy or some other store wherever they carry it and just be able to pick up the Nintendo Switch 2. Like, there would be no room for confusion there. It would just be like, oh, I want to pick up the Switch 2. And immediately the person who's selling it will be able to be like, okay, here you go. Here's the Switch 2. Simple, done deal. And so, yeah, I respect it. They're just trying to go for a very simplistic approach here. And even in the design, you can see that it's very simplistic. I think they really want to emphasize the point that this is just another iteration of the Switch and not something that's like a massively different console altogether. It's still within the family. It's still just a Switch, but better, which is exactly what we were expecting it to be. I don't think anyone was expecting it to be anything else. Though, obviously, the reaction to this first trailer is a little more on the underwhelming side as far as the internet goes, and understandably so. Even though I'm super excited for it, I can imagine that there's some people who maybe aren't quite as excited as they would have been with the previous generations, and that's because of a couple of reasons. You know, obviously we had seen leaks leading up to it, so any sort of surprise that we might have seen had already been revealed, even though there wasn't much else to reveal anyway. And then B, obviously, like I said, it's just an iteration rather than a complete overhaul of everything. Like, it's not the next innovative thing, like going from the Wii U to the Switch. It's not that kind of jump. It's more like going from the Wii to the Wii U. But just because the sort of changes and stuff are more so incremental than maybe some people might expect, doesn't mean that they aren't still there. I mean, you'll be surprised to see what's inside of there. It's really the hardware and the internals that really sets it apart, and it's probably the most important aspect of it. Because you see, the Switch, even as, you know, impressive as this thing is with the optimization and how they're able to run games on something like this, hardware that is something equivalent to something like a PS3, maybe slightly better, but it's very, very impressive what they can do with it in the optimization sense. But there comes a point where this can only go so far. Like, you can only push this to its limits. I mean, I think Tears of the Kingdom was a good example of how far we can push it. I mean, it's still crazy how they were able to get that to perform as well as it did, but I mean, I remember going back to into it some months back just to check it out and see how it ran, and it definitely doesn't run as well. I don't know if it's like a problem with my particular unit, even though it's only a few years old, but it definitely is slowing down, and there are signs of it. I even mentioned this in my Echoes of Wisdom review. Not everyone had this issue, but a lot of people were talking about how it would drop frames. And so, yeah, I think a revision was greatly needed in the year of 2025. Now, how much of an improvement is it? Now, when we're talking about specs and internals, and we're talking about like technology as a whole, it's very hard to like really make a proper equivalent because, you know, there are so many little moving parts and things that are different, and optimization is different. So there aren't really things that are going to be a 100% neck and neck comparison. However, if I were to compare this to something, I would say it's probably somewhere in between a PS4 and a PS4 Pro. Now, some people are like, oh, is that it? I mean, look, like I said, the regular Switch is running on hardware that is about as good as a PS3. So moving from that to a PS4, which still looks really good, is more than enough at this point. Trust me, it will last a long time. Nintendo are masters at optimization. They know how to make their games run really well on hardware that is really outdated. But nonetheless, we're going from basically 4 gigs of RAM to 12 gigs of RAM. And I don't know about you, but putting that sort of power in a handheld isn't really something that's usually done, not at this price point anyway.
Power of the sun in the palm of my hand.
We'll get more into that later though. Now, most of what I will talk about is based off of rumors and speculation. However, I mean, all the leaks leading up to this have been true so far, so I would say that at least 85% of what I'm about to tell you is also going to be true. But we won't get an official confirmation or idea until April the 2nd. And for those of you outside of North America, the Nintendo Direct will be on April 2nd, not February 4th. But until then, we will just rely off of the leaks that we have. And so if we're going based off of that, to compare the Switch to the Switch 2, so while the Switch targeted 1080p 60 when docked, the Switch, when you're playing handheld, will only be able to output 720. But now we're moving from the 6.2-inch display, or a 7-inch display if you have the OLED, to an 8-inch display. Now, the unfortunate downside to this is that it's still an LCD, not an OLED, which is disappointing considering we already have an OLED model of the Switch. I imagine it's probably so that they can sell an OLED version later on down the road. Now, going back to talking about the simplicity of it, part of what makes it simple is the minimalism in its design. And part of what makes it so minimalistic is the color choice. I feel like making it matte black makes it so much more muted, and I kind of dig it. I mean, obviously it's nice to have the sort of colorfulness and playfulness of the Switch, but also this one feels like it means business, you know? Now, are they going to release other color options down the road? Maybe. But I feel like, because if we look at the design and sort of the color of this, the color really is only on the Joy-Cons themselves. We have the little rings around the thumbsticks and then obviously off to the side, but you don't really see much of that. It's mostly just black. Now, obviously they could always make the rest of it and change it, but I feel like it's an indication that this is probably the only real sort of model that we're going to see. It's not going to be like how where they released with the original Switch, they had the red and blue and then they had the all gray. I feel like they'll just release this on its own, just the regular black. And what that means to me is maybe that is an indication that they'll release more special editions rather than different color options, because I feel like this is a different sort of direction they're taking it a little bit. But I can't remember where I read it, but I think I saw something that said that they would also maybe include a white version of it, which would be cool. But now, okay, I don't have any sort of evidence or anything. This is all pure speculation on my part. There's nothing that really leads me to that conclusion. But I would think that maybe they want to leave the white model for the OLED model, just so that they have more of an incentive for you to actually buy it. Kind of like what they did with the Switch itself, going from the Switch and then the Switch OLED. The Switch OLED is the only way to get that white model, right? It's that extra incentive. Now, the other incentive with the OLED Switch was it had a bigger screen. So I'd assume that the OLED Switch 2 would be even bigger than the regular Switch 2. Yeah. See, I'm already getting confused with the naming conventions. I tripped up on that. So I guess it is a good idea. If I were to guess how much bigger, just based off of like the Steam Deck, for example, going from the Steam Deck to the Steam Deck OLED, this is an 8-inch display, just like the Switch 2 will be. but the OLED model is 8.4 inch. So maybe the Switch Tube OLED would follow suit. When docked, the Switch only targets 1080p 60, and not even all the time. There are very few games that actually make it to 60, and as I've said, it drops frames a lot, especially on some of the newer games. So I'm mostly just hoping for a stable frame rate more than anything, but it would be nice if the rumors are true that we also get 4K. Now, obviously, it's not going to be a true 4K image. We barely get 4K on our current gen consoles like the PS5 and the Series X. They kind of target it, but it's not really 4K. But according to the leaks, it's going to have a DLSS style upscaling that brings it up to 4K. Obviously not DLSS itself because that is NVIDIA, but their own version of it. And personally, I think that's enough. That's more than enough for me. So while it is a bit of a bummer that we won't get that OLED screen, to be honest, most of us, I think, play docked. So for me, it doesn't really matter because 90% of the time I play docked. Maybe it will be different for you, but I imagine if you are more of a handheld player, you probably wouldn't even care all that much, to be quite honest. But as I said, everything feels like a much needed revision of the Switch. Not a massive overhaul, but a good one. Like the Switch itself, obviously, as I said, the screen is bigger, but the entire Switch is bigger. The Joy-Cons are also noticeably an improvement. First of all, you're going to notice that they're no longer the sliding rail kinds. They are magnetic, which I think is better because, when you slide it off, I think a lot of people found themselves breaking it. I don't think most people break it, but the people can be pretty rough with it. I imagine you can still be pretty rough, and some kids will probably end up breaking the little metal piece inside, but I also feel like it's just an easier design and nicer design just to be able to click them together. But also, the Joy-Cons seem to be more premium and bigger, obviously. Like the entire console, not just the screen, is bigger. And so that also means bigger buttons, which is a plus because I absolutely abhor the buttons on the Switch. Like, I'm probably one of the only people who haven't gotten stick drift, but that's because I never use those Joy-Cons. They feel flimsy as hell. But I kind of also wish that they added like a proper D-pad rather than the little directional buttons that they have. It's not a deal breaker or anything, but it would have been nice. It's just another thing that I'm just like, okay, it would have been nice if you included that too. But hey, you know what? Can't complain. Another subtle difference that you may notice between the original Switch Joy-Cons and the Switch 2 Joy-Cons is that, yes, it has the share button and the home button, but then there's an additional square that you might notice. I don't know why they blanked that out, but according to the leaks, that should be the C button. Now, what the C button will do, I'm not entirely sure. I read that it probably would be like a chat functionality thing, which would be pretty cool, but I find it kind of bizarre that they would hide that. Like, what? For what reason? For what reason, Nintendo? Why are you hiding it? But like I say, Nintendo does what Nintendo wants. But along the top, we also have an additional USB-C port. So not only the one that would connect to the dock, but also another one in case you need to attach any peripherals. Because I think USB-C is becoming much more universal and much more needed and much more necessary. So it's just nice to have that extra addition. Now, a function that I'm probably most curious about and as to how they're going to integrate it is something that I initially missed when I watched the trailer the first time around. Now, this was actually mentioned in the leaks, but I tried my best to avoid the leaks before it, so I didn't catch it at first, and even when I watched it, I didn't catch it. I just thought it was a simple design thing. But if you watch this clip again, it's very deliberate. You might notice that the Joy-Cons are sort of drifting. Okay, not in that way, but they are scurrying like mice. Yeah, they even got the wrist strap and everything that sort of resembles a tail. And that's because, according to the leaks, these Joy-Cons aren't just going to be regular Joy-Cons, they're gonna act as mice as well. Now, how they're gonna implement it, I'm kind of unsure. I'm not entirely sure how it's gonna feel. It doesn't seem like it would be the most comfortable thing to use. I'm not sure really which situations you would be using it. Maybe it's like a gimmicky thing, I don't know. But nonetheless, I'm still kind of curious as to how that's gonna work and how it's gonna feel. Like, is it gonna feel sort of just more like a stapler when you press down? I don't know. We'll see. But the thing I love about this trailer is that they didn't try to oversell it. They were just like, here you go. Here's the console. Look at it. There you go. They didn't say anything else about it. They just dropped it. And I think it's one of those things where they're just like trying to show their confidence, but they're also not trying to overstate and oversell what it is. Like, it's not a massive thing. And it couldn't be more clear with the name itself being Nintendo Switch 2 and just slapping the 2 right in the logo, so that you really know that it's just a simple successor to the original Switch. But they also just casually dropped Mario Kart 9 in the trailer. Like, it's crazy. In the trailer, we get to see a very brief glimpse of it, but it's very clear that it is a new Mario Kart. It's not Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I mean, there's a few notable differences. One, which is something that I think a lot of people for some reason are bagging on, is the Donkey Kong redesign. I don't really understand the controversy here, because, I mean, it's not technically even a redesign. Donkey Kong has looked like that in previous iterations. He has looked like that before. Personally, even though it might not be maybe as good as the Rare design, I don't mind it. I don't really see what the problem is here. But hey, you know what? I'm no Donkey Kong enthusiast, so who am I to say? But the more exciting thing that you might have missed is the fact that this is seemingly gonna have 24 players. Yeah, a 24-player Mario Kart. Like, that's insane. So if there was a surprise, that definitely was one. And if there was a reason to buy this, I think it's gonna be a huge seller. Like, people are gonna buy this just so that they can play Mario Kart 9 with their friends. It's a clever decision, and it makes sense to have it be a launch title. I think people are gonna pick this up no matter what, because it is Nintendo, and people will just love anything Nintendo does. I mean, we're also due for a new 3D Mario, which I assume is going to be maybe a launch title, I hope, as well, maybe. And so that will bring people in, and then maybe a new Zelda. But aside from those, I think another massive console seller will probably be something that people have been asking for a really long time. And that is with the addition of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. People would go nuts for that. If they dropped that on the Switch 2, do you know how insane it would be? Like, people would lose their mind. I mean, people have been wanting this for years, and I did not help that when I made this. Yeah, I only made it worse for them. Now, like a lot of things, we don't know exactly what the price is going to be, but we can make an educated guess. Most people, including me, would assume that this would retail for about 400 USD, or 500 Canadian, making it just about $100 more than the original Switch, because it is quite the iteration. If you're gonna mark up the OLED model for just a few extra changes, an extra $50, then putting this at another 50 makes total sense. Any more than that, I feel like it's going to be a little hard to justify the price for a lot of people, including myself. I mean, we're all still going to do it, but I mean, yeah. But yeah, it definitely wouldn't make sense to be any higher than that price. But I guess, like a lot of things, we will have to wait and see. But that's it for me. That is a quick overview of the Switch 2 and what we know so far. And I don't know about you, but I'm super excited. But let me know how you guys are feeling, what you think about it. Are you going to buy this day one? Or is this something that you're going to pick up maybe later on down the road? Let me know what you guys think. And until next time, I'll see you guys soon.